It's been a while since we put out a podcast episode, and I apologize, but I've been out of commission for the last few weeks with a really brutal case of sciatica, slip disc. I'm on the slow mend, and it's wonderful to be back. This is a great episode I recorded on Monday, July 13th with Ya'akov Katz. We dig into the domestic political mayhem in Israel, which is just beginning to build. Not that it's been exactly light touch for the last few years, but we're heading into a desperately needed election period, the first in 4 years. We begin this episode by pausing to remember Senator Lindsay Graham, who passed away suddenly on Saturday, July 11th, shortly after returning to his home in America, following yet another whirlwind trip to Ukraine. The man was unstoppable. We've seen and heard so many warm tributes to Senator Graham in recent days, but I would like to share this one today, recorded by Channel 12 journalist Barak Ravid. He's the White House correspondent for the network. If you watch this episode online, at least this part, you'll be able to read the English subtitles.
אני לפחות אתגעגע אליו מאוד. בשנתיים האחרונות אני חושב שדיברנו כמעט כל יום. הוא אדם שאהב את הישראליות. הוא אדם שאהב את הישראלים. זה משהו אחר. השיחה האחרונה שלנו הייתה כשהוא חזר ברכבת מאוקראינה, לפני 3 ימים אני חושב, ואחר כך הוא דיבר עם חבר משותף שלנו, ואמר שהוא קצת מרגיש לא טוב, שהוא קצת מרגיש לחץ בחזה, ואותו חבר משותף אמר, תלך לרופא, הוא אמר, כן, מחר אני אמור לדבר ב-Meet the Press ב-NBC, אני אלך אחר כך לרופא, ואז הוא אמר בצחוק, הוא אמר, אבל אני בכל מקרה, אל תדאג, אני לא יכול למות עכשיו, אני צריך לסיים את חוק הסנקציות של רוסיה, אני צריך לעשות שלום בין ישראל לסעודיה, יש עוד כמה דברים שאני צריך לעשות.
We'll have more in a moment on Lindsey Graham, Iran, and the coming elections in Israel. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Tuesday, July 13th. Thank you, Ya'akov Katz, for joining State of Tel Aviv and Beyond, and welcome back from your lovely holiday. It's wonderful to have you back.
Great to be back. I was in your lovely old country. Wow. There's some beautiful places to visit there. 100%.
They really are.
Yeah.
And I'm offering to all my listeners, free of charge, the best travel consulting service for the Rockies and Vancouver Island. Would you agree?
Vivian is my go-to oracle now with everything that has to do with anywhere in Canada, but definitely if you're going to the Rockies and you're going to British Columbia and then you're going to Vancouver Island, I listened to every tip. I was a good disciple. I took her tips.
You were.
I implemented them and they were spot on. Some of the most amazing places I have ever been. So thank you.
My pleasure. I have to say, though, I don't want to be boastful, but my expertise does extend even beyond the Rockies and Vancouver Island. So just, you're on notice. It's some of the most spectacular wildlife and scenery and just everything out there on the West Coast, in my view. Okay, so welcome back. Missed you. I admire your ability to almost totally unplug. You still did your column. And last Friday's was fantastic. I'm incorporating it into something I'm putting out and writing a dispatch today about everything that's been going on. But let's begin, Ya'akov. I know that over the course of your career, you've had numerous opportunities to come in contact with the late Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. And I think anyone who moves in the circles in which we do has had that opportunity, but you more than many. Share with us just a few kind of thoughts, recollections you have of a man who we all agree, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on and what party you belong to here, is a great and true friend of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of, I guess, journalists and analysts over the years have had the opportunity to see and meet him at different conferences and interview him on visits to Israel or visits of mine to Washington. Really just a great friend of the Jewish people, of the Israeli people, of the state of Israel. I don't think anyone else like that today in the Senate. His ability to, over the years, work and extend a hand across the aisle and also work with Democrats was unique. You had that kind of trio of him, the late Joe Lieberman, the late John McCain, I saw actually the three of them once on stage together and at a Saban forum, I want to say maybe 10 years
Wow.
ago in Washington, D.C. And really, it was shortly before McCain passed away. And then, so, after that, Lieberman as well. But it was really, it was unique. It was unique to see these people who really, that old school kind of Republican or independent for that matter, when it came to Lieberman, but really the ability to, and Graham was a comic also. It was just
Yes, he was
constant comic
hilarious.
relief. He was hilarious. It was always funny, but very serious, and really took Israel's security needs and its challenges to heart, and believed that Israel needed to be strong and needed to get the support that it required. And even just recently, we've seen how he stood up and was critical of the MOU that was reached between the United States and Iran, continued to push the Trump administration to be more aggressive, came here countless times ever since October 7th. Who knows how many times he was here already.
Yeah, it
And
was incredible.
and it's a testament how so many Israeli politicians, you've seen over the last 24, 48 hours have posted photos of themselves with him and selfies. And he touched everyone and he met with everyone, and really unique. And what's interesting is, it's the kind of the end of a generation to some extent, right? That type of politician who really felt the Israeli security needs in his or her kishkas. You don't have that anymore on either side of the
Yeah.
aisle. And that's going to be a challenge for Israel going forward. We have to be aware of that.
Huge challenge. Being a boomer, tail end, but still a boomer, what struck me was this feeling that keeps coming back, or this recognition, awareness of, as you put it, old school, last of a type, or one of the last of a type. In my view, I would say, highly principled and knowledgeable and committed. And we don't see that quality in our political life as much, if at all. And it reminds me, I don't want to be maudlin, but, as direct survivors from the Holocaust were dying, and we all of a sudden had this kind of understanding, recognition, awareness that the last of the living witnesses are soon going to be gone. And he is the end of an era. I mean, I think of what I grew up with, were people like, Senator Moynihan and Lindsay Graham. And there were so many just extraordinarily committed, smart people. And one of the little details that comes out, which you can't lose sight of, is that, his net worth after 50 years in public life, service and public life, was $1.4 to $2 million. That used to be normal, that people would go in and not come out super wealthy gazillionaires. Everyone does these days. And we don't look at it. And that is a reflection, in my view, of something really serious and really off. Even, it's been going on for decades now, but one of the big examples of that would be President Obama, who went into office with the kind of earnings from his book, and it was like 4 or 5 million. And by the time he came out, he was worth 30. And you got to ask, has that happened? Has that happened? It really is the surface of so much that's wrong with the people and the system these days, that we don't even remark on it or notice it.
He was a true, I mean, you're 100% right that Lindsey Graham was a true public servant and served the people and served the issue. And, if we look at what we have here in Israel, it's also to some extent a comparison of, you have these career politicians who often at times you wonder, what are they serving? Are they serving the people? Are they serving themselves and advancing their career? Put politics aside for a moment. It's something worthy of respect when people are dedicating such an extensive period of time for a larger cause than themselves.
Absolutely. And it's, just again, to throw in another metaphor, and then we'll get on to all the fun stuff we have to discuss today, which is the Middle East and Iran, of course, and domestic politics in Israel. But, when I was in law school, and you do these trial competitions, and also another kind of, debating thing, moot court debates, where you debate issues with your peers. I remember learning that it was actually in a course called The Practice of Criminal Law. And we were taught by two guys, brilliant guys. One ended up being on the Supreme Court of Canada for quite a period of time. One was a criminal defense lawyer. One was what you call a state attorney in America, what we in Canada call crown prosecutors. And they were really great friends in real life. And It was such a basic thing to learn from these guys that, yeah, you go in court, you go to court, you fight like hell, you serve a higher cause and purpose and principle, and then you go have a beer after. And we've lost that. We've lost that ability to be civil and professional and decent in our political life, in our civil discourse, in so much. So, okay, that's my homily for the day. Rest in peace, Lindsey Graham. Now let's get into the gutter, shall we, Ya'akov?
Let's go.
Okay, I want to start now, Ya'akov, with Iran, just because we have to, because last night was pretty crazy. It was very explosive in many senses of the word. But the U.S. seems to have hit Iran hard. We're receiving initial reports of what we think were the targets that were hit. And there was also, I don't know if you caught it, I was up pretty late last night, but there was a kind of news blast flash of President Trump being rushed on a super urgent basis through the streets of Washington, and a kind of gathering of many very top administration officials to discuss what I assume were probably the hits on Iran. And I'd love you to touch at some point, if you would. There's talk, there's speculation from some very smart people about the fact that Lindsey Graham's face was on a poster during the past week in Iran, along with many other people, President Trump included, and they had red triangles on their heads. And the Iranian regime has been saying nonstop that they're targets to be killed. We had the drama around President Trump's Air Force One plane, him switching at the last minute from the one that the Qataris gave him to the regular plane for security reasons, we know now. Then we have this sudden death of Lindsey Graham. So there's a lot going on at once. And I would expect that every single person whose picture was on those placards in Iran has significantly beefed up security now. I hope they do. But it's a big kind of messy ball I've just thrown to you, but I'd like you to catch it and make some sense of it. So kind of last night in Iran, what's going on in the administration? And is there something more than nothing to those death threats from the Iranian regime targeting a number of people whose photos were on placards, in which I have to say, Lindsey Graham said, put on Twitter, at least they used a good photo of me. Ya'akov, we had a lot going on, and we're going to start with Iran. And last night was a very busy night. A lot of American activity in the air, attacking targets in Iran, and Iran really going at the Gulf states, including Qatar. It's a very strange situation, especially because Israel has not been attacked at all.
Well, I think that the Iranians are obviously trying to improve their negotiation ability, right? And they're gambling with this belief that Donald Trump does not want to resume all-out hostilities, does not want to go back to a high-intensity conflict, wants to keep things under a certain threshold, and therefore they think that by attacking here or there, putting the pressure on Trump, getting him to respond, and doing this all around the Strait of Hormuz will put the pressure that will get Trump to eventually himself capitulate because of the cost of the rise in the cost of oil, the upcoming midterms, etc. I think that when you look at it that way, you understand why they're retaliating against all the Gulf states, but they're not attacking Israel. Because if they attack Israel, Israel will then will be compelled and have to respond. They don't want Israel to respond because they want to keep the conflict focused just on the Strait of Hormuz, not give Israel, or anyone else for that matter, an opening to attack targets across Iran, regime targets, military targets, the nuclear infrastructure that we've seen in satellite footage they're already rebuilding. They want to keep it isolated to the Strait of Hormuz and keep it more of an economic/military issue, but really not get back to a full-on war. So Israel is watching what's happening, is preparing, is at a heightened state of alert, I'd say, because it could at any moment, we could see a couple ballistic missiles come our way. But for the most part, the assumption in Israel and the assessment within the defense establishment is that Israel's not going to be drawn in that quickly.
So your comments seem to suggest that there is, among the kind of decision-making echelon in Iran that there is some kind of consensus agreement. And I'd like you to just kind of comment briefly on the possibility that what we're seeing in terms of the way that the IRGC is reacting, or seems to be reacting or acting, that they may actually be kind of running things and making decisions much more so than Pezeshkian or Galibaf or any of the sort of senior political leaders. There may be a power struggle going on in Iran right now. This is like the days of Kremlinology, you know?
What we're seeing playing out is exactly a result of this new reality in Iran, right? It should come as no surprise. The military and the IRGC and the hardliners are more emboldened today, are strengthened. They believe that they need to take a harder line. They need to be more extreme, that with the United States and with Israel, and I would say with the West in general, that position has worked, right? They have reason to believe that it's working because so far they've survived. The regime has not fallen. If anything, they've reestablished control over the civilian population. The attacks did not succeed in removing and destroying all of their capabilities. And what they ended up seeing was that at the end of the day, the Americans don't have an appetite for a long, sustained, drawn-out conflict. So why would a more progressive, liberal, or openness to a more moderate approach take hold there right now? There's no reason for it.
And they've also seen what appears to be a somewhat volatile president who one day is boasting about how reasonable and what good guys they are, and then a few days later is calling them, as he did on the fringe of the NATO summit in Turkey last week, scum, and some other, choice epithets. There were reports that the Iranian leadership had actually looked to psychologists to help them decipher this man and his behavior. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But his behavior and his comments are somewhat extreme and volatile. How do you think that is being read by Iran?
In reference to Trump, he is volatile and he is not the most stable and not the most consistent, right? That's no secret. We all kind of know that. The Iranians look at that as something of, on the one hand, a liability, but also a potential asset, right? The fact that they know that he can just jump from one policy to the next very quickly, and that gives them an advantage. But I think that what you see also is that at the end of the day, Trump right now is acting very cautiously, right? I don't think it's just random that the conflict at the high intensity stage ended just as the World Cup was beginning, ended as the price of oil was skyrocketing. He brought it back down, kind of put that aside. The World Cup has another week or two left to it. And, then right away, we're just 2-3 months out of the midterms. He doesn't want to get to that point that the Americans, because at the end of the day, and, I was just in the United States, this from talking to people, no one there cares about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz or what's happening with Iran and this whole foreign policy adventure that the president decided to go on. But what they very much care about is how much they're paying for the gallon at the gas pump and at the gas station. And that has a real life impact. So when you're talking to Americans and you understand that at the end of the day, he's got, we started with Lindsey Graham, right? South Carolina is, I think 58% of South Carolina voted for Trump in the last election, right? Lindsey Graham just won the primaries on Thursday of last week, right? He was up for re-election. Who's going to take over his seat? The governor will appoint someone. The Republican Party in South Carolina now will have to have a primary in some sort of race or some sort of decision to be able to choose a new candidate to run against the Democratic challenger. But all of this, again, it has impact. Now, even if that state leans heavily right and is pro-Trump, the majority that the Republican Party has in the Senate or is expected to retain in the Senate is not that big. And therefore, each of these races has real life strategic consequences for what comes next. The president doesn't want to screw around with that. And the price of oil in the Strait of Hormuz will impact whatever comes next.
Yeah, and not to skip over the obvious part that it's the middle of summer holidays and people are doing road trips. So they're going to feel it in some ways more now than they might have even a few months ago. The new kind of trajectory of gas prices going up, hopefully short-lived. Okay, we're going to move now to the domestic theater in Israel, which is really what I wanted to focus on today. But over the last 2 days, so much has gone on that we had to zoom out a bit. We learned last night that we're going to be having elections on October 27th, which is the last day on which they can be held. I mean, classic Netanyahu, just rag that puck, run that clock until the very end. And within about an hour or so of that having been agreed upon by the government, we see the first of what will be many memes with respect to an October 27 election. And I'm going to show it on the screen now. And you can see how the opposition interest parties are highlighting the 7-10 in this meme. And that's a visual that we both know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu really wanted to avoid any association with October 7th. At the very top of the election meme, it's written, Tirshemu biyomanim. Write it up in your day books, in your calendars. And then, of course, we see the date, 2710, but the 710 is highlighted in red. And then below that, it says, Machlifim et memshilet hatevach. We are going to get rid of the government of the massacre. It's a kind of accurate enough translation and gives you a taste of the vitriol that Israelis feel towards this coalition government. It's really intense. Here we are 3 years later. He's going into the election. In what kind of position, Ya'akov?
You know, look, polls are not smiling at Benjamin Netanyahu right now. And based on the polls, he does not have anywhere near a majority to be able to form a coalition. And he will not even be any longer the largest party in the Knesset. Gadi Eisenkot, according to the polls, his Yashar party, is polling higher and bigger, 24 seats as opposed to Netanyahu's Likud at 22 seats. But here's something that I do want people to keep in mind, because I think it's important. Netanyahu's government, the government that brought the judicial reform when it was formed in January of 23, that pushed this country into the greatest division that we have seen maybe ever, but definitely in the last 50 years of this country, led to October 7th, was in office on October 7th, the greatest failure, the greatest massacre of Jews on a single day since the Holocaust. The war that has now gone on for nearly 3 years without resolution on any of the fronts, neither in Gaza, where Hamas retains control of 30 to 40% of the territory and has rearmed itself and replenished its ranks, not in Lebanon, where, yes, there's a deal with the government of Lebanon, but Hezbollah is still there with capabilities and with fighters and with rockets. And of course, Iran. We had gone to 2 wars with Iran in this period, and the Iranian regime still intact, if not even stronger than it was before. So you look at all of that and you say, this government has really failed. But on the other hand, and this is what's important, you mentioned October 27th, they will complete a full term in office. That is pretty astounding for a government that has failed so miserably on so many different fronts, on so many different issues. So I don't write off Benjamin Netanyahu at all. I think that this election is one that he goes into, yes, weakened, but not somebody that you can say his career is over. Far from it. The polls right now are not smiling at him, as I said, but a lot can still change. A lot can still move. We could talk about what parties might come, what might move in the middle, what new more moderate right-wing parties might come that could actually help Netanyahu and take back some of the votes that he has lost to the opposition camp. But also, one last point that I think is important for people, I get asked all the time, is it possible for Benjamin Netanyahu to win? And my answer is, you have to redefine the victory. What does it mean to win? Winning for Netanyahu is not necessarily getting a majority of 61. What winning for Netanyahu could mean is just denying the other side the ability to form a government. And that way, he rolls on to another election and stays on as prime minister in an interim capacity, which is something that we saw happen time after time back when we first went to the first election in 2019 and then rolled through 4 to 5 elections. So if you define victory that way, that's definitely within reach for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right. We'll stay away from slogans like total victory because I'm not sure what those mean. And I'm not sure he would want to be defining that in the coming months on the campaign trail. We'll be talking about that in coming months as well. But there is a kind of group within Likud. We know that some prominent Likudniks left the party. Most prominent, of course, in recent weeks, Yuli Edelstein. And hasn't quite placed himself, but I've been waiting for him to do that for years, to just kind of, break off and realize that this is not the party to which he's been so loyal since coming to Israel in the 90s, former prisoner of Zion, and a man who was, till a few years ago, number 2 on the Likud list in the party, and then kind of nosedived after the last election. There's another group, I'm sure you're aware of this, as I am, that is contemplating leaving the party. And they're younger people. They're people who have been real firebrands and Bibi stim, pro-Bibi people, and people who have been less so and who have been openly voicing their dissent, particularly with the Haredi draft issue. If those people peel off 3, 4, 5 of them in the coming months, that's going to be a big challenge for Benjamin Netanyahu, no?
It depends what those parties actually do in reality. And what I mean by that is the way the map looks right now is you still have 2 camps. The Bibi bloc, which he's shoring up support with. That's how we have to look at all these laws that have been passed over the last week and supposed to be passed this coming week till the Knesset goes to recess at the end of the week on Friday until after the election. All of these laws are aimed at shoring up and the unity of the bloc and the support of ultimately the ultra-orthodox, the haredim, to make sure that they stay with him in the day after the election and they don't get enticed to potentially give their support to a government led by either Naftali Bennett or Gadi Eisenkot, looking more like Gadi Eisenkot at the moment because he is the biggest party. And because that would mean the end of Netanyahu. So he's giving everything he can to the ultra-Orthodox now so that they stick with him the day after, assuming that the other side doesn't have a majority, does not get to the 61. Now, in the middle, though, so the 2 camps are very much the yes Bibi camp and the no Bibi camp, which leaves some space in the middle for people who say, listen, I'm not here for Bibi or not Bibi. I'm here for the people of Israel. And right there, right now, you have a few players who are vying for that space and that real estate. One of them is Benny Gantz, who's joining with Dedi Simchi, who's the former head of the fire. He's the fire commissioner of Israel, Fire and Rescue Services. He had a child who was killed during the war. He's a former IDF brigadier general. They're joining together. They're trying to launch a party that Benny Gantz is saying right now they're not crossing the threshold in any polls, but Benny Gantz is saying, listen, it's enough boycotting. Now we're here to create a unity government of Zionist parties, which basically means not writing off Benjamin Netanyahu. You have also Yuli Edelstein, you mentioned, who might be joining with Ayelet Shaked, the former justice minister, the former sidekick and partner to Naftali Bennett, back when he was with the religious Zionist party, the Jewish Home Party, as it was called at the time. Also with potentially Gilad Erdan, who was a former Likudnik, former top-level minister in different consecutive Netanyahu governments, then went off to be the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations in a short period also in Washington. He's contemplating running as a new moderate right-wing party. Maybe he'll join with Edelstein. Maybe he'll try to do something else. And then you also have, in that same place, same space, Yoaz Hendel, the former communications minister, who was the chairman of the Miluimnikim party, joined forces with Chili Tropper. very well-respected, well-liked consensus figure who was the number 2 to Benny Gantz. And they've added to their party already 2 people. One of them is Shira Shapira, who is the mother of Anir Shapira, one of the heroes, really, of October 7th. He was the young man, 23, 24 years old, who was in that roadside shelter, threw out 8 or 9 of those grenades that Hamas had lobbed inside and caught each one and threw them out until eventually he was killed. And Yasaf Peretz, who is the son of Miriam Peretz, really another consensus figure. Yasaf, 2 of his brothers were killed in wars and in operations, I think mostly one in Lebanon and one in the Gaza Strip. Really, they're also trying to take up some of that middle ground space. Now, why is that interesting? Is because if any of these parties actually get some momentum, and it's still, we're waiting to see what happens, but if they do get momentum, who are they going to pull votes away from? Now, there's 2 options, or 3 options. One is they could pull from both camps, and that's how they could take a little from Eisenkot and Bennett, a little from Likud and the Religious Zionist Party. Or what could end up happening is that all those people, those voters who left the Likud because they got fed up and went and now parked their vote by Bennett or Eisenkot, now see that there's someone more right-wing, really right-wing I say that figuratively, and they feel more at home with that right-wing politician, whether it's Edelstein or Erdan or Shaked or Dedi Simchi or Yoaz Hendel or Chili Tropper, and they park now their vote there. Those people, if those parties can get across the threshold, that could be a game changer for Bibi. It might not get Bibi closer. It might not get Bibi to 61, but it would definitely get him much closer to 61. So there's still plenty of time for this whole map that we're seeing to really change, I would say, dramatically in the weeks to come.
Yeah, things seem very fluid, which they always are. It's just kind of like it feels next level right now. Having said that, my sense is that there's this growing, I don't know what to call it, but a clump. The clump is built around a common opposition to some key ways in which Benjamin Netanyahu has run the country for the last 4 years. One of those is his support of Haredi demands and pandering to. And we're going to get into that with a discussion of the draft law or the shirkers law, depending on what you want to call it. There's a coalescence in that I would sort of see a different middle that I don't think really matters or turns as much on right wing, left wing. I think the issue is unity, true unity, and unity focused on some very key issues, national values issues. So when I, for example, I'm not religious, when I look at the Chili Tropper, Yoaz Hendel, Shapira, Peretz party, I know they're all observant, but their core issue is unity and responsibility. And that's kind of the hymn book that everyone's singing from these days. Service, step up. That's our core national value. You know, Torah study is not a core national value in the same way as the haredim have been trying to present it, and which also Benjamin Netanyahu has been supporting in the last few weeks in particular. As you mentioned at the outset, they're getting ready to jam many laws through the Knesset at a beyond frenzied pace. And one of those, of course, is the shirkers law, the law that will protect the ultra-orthodox men from being drafted into the IDF. It's a step down from what the Haredi parties had hoped to pass, which would have elevated Torah to, the level of military service and given them some kind of forever eternal exemption. But tell us a bit from your perspective about how this push to keep the haredim out of any obligation to serve in the IDF or national service, how that's playing out and may play out in the coming election. Because I see that as the issue. I really do. I think everything flows from that, but this autonomous caste of super privileged and entitled people, I just don't think the nation can tolerate it any longer.
Here's the question that I think we have to ask. First of all, I totally agree with you, right? I think this is the issue. I think this is the one that really is at the core and is about the future of the country is this, because there's nothing more blatant and absurd and perverted than what we see today with the fact that there is a group of people who are carrying the burden, who are serving in reserves, who are working, who are paying taxes, and there's a group of people who do none of that and just think that they have it coming to them without sharing any equal share or burden of what the rest of we are doing as the people of this country who are serving. And that's something that has to change. But with that said, let me ask you a question, Vivian. When people in the opposition, if they have two options at the end of the day, not be able to form a government, right, because they won't have the numbers, or be able to pull the haredim away from Bibi's orbit, but at a price, they would have to give the ultra-orthodox what they want in terms of some sort of draft law that will not be what Yoaz Hendel or Gadi Eisenkot or Naftali Bennett or Yair Lapid want now in terms of what they're saying. But they'll be able to pull the ultra-Orthodox away, sever that relationship between Likud and the ultra-Orthodox, but it will come at a price. What will their voters prefer? For them to bring down Bibi and pull the haredim out of Bibi's orbit, or to say, no, we're standing up for the cause, we're not giving in an inch, and if we need to, we'll roll to another election, but we will not give the ultra-Orthodox what they want. I'll tell you what I think. I think that
I was all ready to answer. I was all ready with my answer. You go ahead.
So you answer first. You answer first.
No, I'm batting cleanup.
I think that they will, I'll say something extreme, but I think that the hatred of Bibi is greater than the hatred of the ultra-Orthodox. And therefore, if there's an opportunity to bring down Bibi, they will give the haredim almost a blanket exemption from continued service.
So I hope you're wrong. And I don't know that I entirely agree with a few of the premises upon which you base your conclusion. I think that the concern with the broader health and sustainability of this country rests on a military in which everyone serves, not just, because they share the burden, but they share the values. This is just a foundational value, and it was articulated by Ben-Gurion in a very canny way, and it's something that has persisted. You leave no one behind. We're all in this together. And the way in which the Netanyahu government has elevated the concerns and priorities of the haredim, I think has stirred up very deep hatred and anger towards them. Because what they're saying is, we're better than you. We're different. And we make our own rules in this country. We move in different circles in our personal lives and social lives, probably. But I think that there is greater anger at that and a recognition that has to be curbed. We have a situation now where the haredim have been granted this blanket continued exemption until a new government is formed for at least 7 months. And at the same time, we have young conscripts who have served well above and beyond are going to find out at the last minute that their required service period is extended for another 2 or 3 months. We're seeing extensions of reserve periods being brought into law. It's insanity. People simply can't continue to do it. So I think here's my scenario. I'm not a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud, but I think that he could be accommodated except for the Liebermans of the world. And Lieberman is the one person in this mix we haven't talked about, who's going up in the polls, who some insiders have told me they think is actually he's the dark horse in this, that he may pull some rabbits out of the hat this time, not Benjamin Netanyahu. So let's just look at it differently. We have Hilly Troper, who was on Channel 12 the other night on the news and said absolutely he will not sit with Netanyahu, okay? Everyone else is a little more wobbly on that point, except for Lieberman, who has been very clear now for several elections that he will not sit with the haredim, period, unless they accept this national unity, national security agenda around which all the other parties seem to be coalescing. I'm not sure I would rely on Hilly Troper to hold that ground, but I will rely on Lieberman. Without Lieberman, they don't have the numbers.
Yeah.
They just don't. And Lieberman will not go in with the haredim. So here's a scenario I think is more likely. I think peeling off the Shas seats and the Shas party. That's Aryeh Deri, of course, Sephardic base. It's always been a paradox that he maintains his 7, 8, 9 seats. He may get 9 this time, more because of deep-seated concerns about racism, residual racism in Israeli society, than support for the draft. Most of Aryeh Deri's supporters serve, and they work. And we saw the chief Sephardic rabbi just in the last few days say, I think we could work with Gadi Eisenkot. Let's not rule that out. So I think that the potential for Shas to peel off is much higher. And I think that they will be more pragmatic. I think that the Ashkenaz parties, United Torah Judaism, I think they have been very rigid, and they will continue to be rigid because they're fighting for their survival in a different way.
Do hear your point. First of all, yeah, no, I'll respond to just a couple of pieces of what you just said. Number one, I agree with you about Lieberman. He's probably the most hardliner who will not agree to sit with the haredim and will not be able to sit with Netanyahu. But we do hear, and you can't ignore, is Yair Golan, the head of the Democrats Party, Gadi Eisenkot, the head of Yashar Party, have both said, we'd be open to talking with the haredim at different points. You're also hearing the Shas guys who are saying that. My point being that if we've learned anything in all these election cycles that we've been through, is that you can't really believe anything that anyone says. Lieberman might be the outlier, but everything here is very fluid. And if the objective, my point is, if the objective is we have to bring down Bibi no matter what the cost is, then what these parties might say to themselves to rationalize it is, okay, we'll give the haredim what they're looking for. We'll have to submit. We'll have to surrender on our main issue of service. But it's for the greater goal of giving the country the ability to heal, to reset, to restart, to get rid of this government and this prime minister. Now, I'd be torn, to be honest, because on the one hand, I think, yes, this government does need to go. I think that, yes, the country needs new leadership, but I also think that service needs to be the most important issue, right? And we shouldn't surrender and compromise on what has to be the most important issue. Look, the IDF Chief of Staff just the other day said, we're going to have to move and reduce forces in Lebanon, in Gaza, move them to the West Bank, to Judea and Samaria, because we have to let reservists off because reservists are serving way too much. And it's just a burden on the reservists. We can't rely on them. They've been serving hundreds and hundreds of days. That's true. And the haredim are the solution to that. But with all that said, if there is that fork in the road, it will be interesting to see which way they go. Now, maybe they won't need it. Maybe they'll be able to get to a majority. Maybe those middle ground parties of Edelstein, Shaked, Erdan, Gantz, and all the others will actually pull votes away from Bibi and not pull votes away from the opposition parties. And that will actually be to the benefit of the opposition. But we have now 3 months and 3.5 months, pretty much, till the election, right? That's a long time in Israeli political life. That's a long time in what so much can happen here, in things can change. Let me throw out one wild card, Vivian. Seriously, crazy wild card, right? The war with Iran ends in some sort of agreement over the next month. Suddenly, there's a summit in Washington that Trump invites Bibi and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, to attend. He comes. They sign a peace agreement, right? There's normalization with Saudi Arabia. I mean, this can go in so many different ways. Would that help Bibi? Yeah, big time, right? It would give Bibi a whole new story to tell. So, or, for example, there's a renewal of hostilities with Iran that is an all-out conflict, even though I said before, I don't think that's what Trump would want to do, but maybe it goes that way. And the regime actually ends up falling in a month or two from now, right before the election. And Bibi says, listen, I got that. That's what I told you would happen. So we're still very early on in this competition, in this battle, and in this race.
All fair points. I think that the people as a whole, the overwhelming majority of the people, and I hope I'm right, I think they're sick of the stories. I think they're sick of the spin. I think that the cost since October 7th, and on October 7th, of course, is just, it's still with us 3 years later. Nothing has diminished. If anything, it's become stronger. In the immediate aftermath of October 7th, everybody pulled out the hymn books and they were all singing the same song, which was unity. We have to pull together, and nobody's singing that version of the unity anymore.
Right.
They're just not. And I think that when people send their children and their husbands and their sons for 3 years with no let up, I don't think that they're going to be quite as open to any spin or news stories coming out of this prime minister. And one, before we wrap, we have to include a very brief mention of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who seems to be doing quite well in the polls and has been consistently hearing, just to throw it into the mix, not just the possibility, but the reality being borne out in polls that he's pulling and targeting Shas voters. He'll get a few, some from Likud, kind of the more extreme ones, but Shas is very fertile ground, people seem to think, to boost their standing. And he's polling at around 10 or so now. So he's a significant factor in this race. Your brief comments on him.
You know, Itamar Ben-Gvir is anywhere from 8, 9 to 10 in different polling. He's pulling people away, also from Likud, also from the religious Zionist party, from Betzalel Smotrich, and also some of the Shas voters. He's very popular with young first-time voters, with soldiers, with 18-year-olds. It's a phenomenon that you're seeing all over the world, but Ben-Gvir knows how to play that card really well. It does him good. But here, Ben-Gvir has an advantage and a disadvantage. His advantage is that because Netanyahu is so reliant on him and needs him for a future coalition, he can exert serious pressure on Netanyahu and control over Netanyahu's policies. But the disadvantage is that he's got only one ticket to government, and that's with Netanyahu. And any other government that comes together would be without Ben-Gvir. So he knows that. And therefore, he does have to be a bit cautious, because he knows that if anyone on the other side is forming a government, he's in the opposition. And that might not be the end of the world for him, because in the opposition, a party like his could climb and he could claim to be the new right-wing party that actually stands up for what's right, and right figuratively, and everyone else is on the left. But this is his one way to stay in government, and that's where he wants to be. He doesn't want to be in the opposition. So for Ben-Gvir right now, this is a good position to be in, but we'll have to wait to see, obviously, how it all falls after the voting and what coalition options actually exist.
And I want to just point out before we wrap, Ya'akov, that you mentioned first-time voters and soldiers. In the past, soldiers have tended to vote left. So it's a pretty significant change that we're seeing. I also want to mention that in the Knesset, there are 120 seats. First-time voters, if all of them turned out and cast their vote in this election, they have the numbers to decide the equivalent of 17 out of 120 seats. That's an extraordinary number. And they've done their army service, and they're coming into this very difficult environment. And I don't know that they're going to turn out in massive numbers to vote. I don't really understand to what degree, if there is a higher level of cynicism, notwithstanding their hard right tendencies. But there's a lot in that mix, and a lot that we don't have any kind of ability. We have no predictors for this kind of situation. We can't kind of look to past circumstances to help us predict the outcome of this situation. So it's going to be interesting times, as they say. We live in interesting times, right, Ya'akov? Always. No, but crazy interesting. All right. We're going to be doing a lot of chatting over the next few months, and wonderful to see you back. And thank you for your time today.
Always a pleasure, Vivian. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for being here. If you missed it yesterday, we dropped a written piece where we get into detail regarding the domestic political shenanigans that have been playing out for the last 2 weeks in Israel. It's unseemly. In particular, we look at how the haredim managed to bring Netanyahu to his knees. And Netanyahu submitted because he really wants to stay in power. At age 76, he gave away the country's soul, especially in the last few weeks. He agreed to pass a law exempting all ultra-orthodox men from IDF service forever. It's very sobering stuff that we included in our written dispatch yesterday, and well worth the read if you ask me. Thanks again for being here. Until next time. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN@stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.